Good afternoon. Thanks for joining. I'm Mark Aiello, Vice President and General Manager for Venue, the virtual data room platform of R.R. Donnelley. Over the past year, the deal-making landscape in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry has been shifting. We've seen 480 deals so far in 2014, up 15% from last year, according to Thomson Reuters. Not only is deal volume up, but we're also seeing mega deals and large asset swaps, as well as many companies with vast amounts of dry powder on hand, allowing them to contemplate future deals. The industry hasn't seen this much activity since the year 2000. Today, we'll take a look at what's driving all this and what we can expect to see over the rest of the year. I'm joined by Tim Shannon, partner at Kane & Partners, Orlin Boston, principal at EY, and Adam Goldburn, senior associate at Lux Capital. Thanks for joining, gentlemen. First question I'm going to ask the panel to consider today is, what's driving the strong M&A activity we're seeing in the pharma and biotech industry today? Orlin?
Well, I think, as you mentioned, volume's up. Values are certainly up as it pertains to life sciences, pharma and biotech. We've actually seen a decrease in volume, but a huge spike in value. And I think certainly pharma has finally come back from the sidelines. So in 2013, they really stood, they sort of stood back, watched the biotechs and specialty companies really do a lot of the M&A activity, but they've come roaring back. I think everyone can agree. I mean, this is an unprecedented M&A environment in life sciences. But I would categorize the drivers of this really into 4 or 5 categories. One being just some of the systemic factors that are creating an environment where this sort of deal activity is occurring. 2, just extreme focus on portfolio management and rationalization, and then a couple of traditional ones, industry consolidation, diversification, and then some unique ones. But really quickly on sort of the systemic ones. Large pharma is looking to grow. All right, this is a 3rd year in a row that there's been negative growth, and they've got to close those growth gaps. Some companies don't have visibility to growth for the next 3 or 4 years, and are going to have to acquire that. And so it's partly what we're seeing. We're also seeing confidence coming back. Our EY Capital Confidence Barometer survey, where we survey about 1,500 senior execs across different industries, including life sciences, indicate that confidence is finally back. So in the boardroom, CEOs are feeling good about placing bets. And when you look at that with the backdrop of record low financing, low interest rates, which who knows how long those will last, I think that's creating an environment for this sort of activity to occur.
Tim, what do you see?
Well, I think for the past 5 or 10 years, if you think back, we talked about nothing but the patent cliff and the impact that is going to have on industry. In fact, I think 2014 we're still in it, but we don't talk about it anymore. So I think again psychologically, what's happened is large pharma has moved beyond this, and they fundamentally have reorganized their business models, and we've seen a huge shift from general practitioner product companies to specialty companies across the board. We've seen a huge shift from traditional small molecules to biologicals and frankly other more complicated therapies. So I think conceptually these businesses have realigned themselves, and now what they're trying to do is execute in those new business models. And to do this, they need to be aggressive in terms of bringing in technologies and bringing in products to feed these new businesses. So I think that's a big factor. Is psychologically, I think everyone's positive. They have their mindset. We're beyond the patent cliff, but now they have to fill in the holes of those businesses, which is creating a lot of this. I think the second factor I would say is there's a new emergence of new players in this that actually were the specialty pharma companies the last 5 to 10 years. So companies like Celgene, like Gilead, like Alexion, like Biotech. These companies have all had great success, really in the biotech role and the realm with specialty products. Have all developed very strong positions, and these guys are out and they're active acquirers now as well. So I think it's both a realignment and good psychology in the traditional big players, but then an emergence of new acquirers and new deal makers with a lot of cash.
Adam, what do you see driving activity?
Yeah, I completely agree with Tim and Orlin. This is about pipelines, right? It's about filling the pipelines, getting the revenue and getting the assets to generate that revenue. And there are a lot of interesting assets out there at the moment in the market and hence a lot of activity. The other thing that I'd like to add is structural advantages to being located in various geographies, whether it's for tax reasons or positioning into those geographies is another reason. And then probably there's an aspect of talent acquisition as well. There's a lot of talented folks out there, and there's that aspect with M&A.
Thanks. So 2013 was a record year for pharma and biotech IPOs and offerings. Tim, how's that changing the way these companies are approaching M&A in 2014?
Well, I think I'll start by just taking a look at it from the space I'm in most, and that's the private stage companies and early stage companies. And I think it's been a great period for companies looking up. So for again years I wasn't sure the IPO market would ever exist again for these types of companies, and it's come back with a bang. In 2013, not quite as strong this year, but still it exists to this point. And that just creates a whole nother source of capital for early stage companies, so that they don't have to get their backs against the wall, in terms of their early stage financiers looking for exits, prematurely. They have source of public capital. So I think it's made things, very healthy having that, other option, for companies to raise capital. And, a lot of companies that otherwise would have been stuck and may have gotten into trouble now have sourced capital to get to their next stage of value inflection and, and deliver the promise they hope to deliver.
Orlin?
Yeah, I think it's it's allowing these early stage companies to really self-fund through proof of concept or phase 2B without the help of the larger biotech and pharmas. Although you're still seeing obviously large pharma and biotech companies like Celgene in particular taking some interesting equity stakes in various early stage companies that are paying off quite a bit. It's interesting when you think about some of these larger biotech companies that are doing that, like Celgene. They weren't able to do that 10 years ago. They didn't have that kind of firepower. Now they are placing those bets.
Yeah, like Tim, I'm in early stage venture and company creation in the life sciences field. So, pre-IPO window, those companies had one arm tied behind their back, right, in terms of capital raising and strategy and how to actually build those companies. With the IPO window now open, or having been open, there's that extra flexibility that you can have in terms of building and moving the company forward. I think from the public side, the big pharma side, I don't think much has changed. I think it's more of a, private or public, it's more of a wait and see and then pick off the assets that fit their businesses best.
Thanks. With successful offerings and cheap debt, biotech companies and specialty practices have more firepower, to steal your term, Orlin, to do deals. How has the M&A landscape changed as these companies now have enough dry powder to challenge big pharma?
Yeah, I think the answer is partly in the question. In that firepower is a company's ability or capacity to do to conduct M&A, right? And that firepower has shifted over the last few years from pharma to the large biotechs and specialties. So as I mentioned, pharma really sort of sat it out in terms of large deals in 2013 and sort of watched the biotechs and specialties companies really do that. But what drives what influences firepower is sort of if your debt is low and your market value is high and cash and equivalents on your balance sheet are high, you've got a higher firepower. So across the board, you're seeing high firepower for all of those segments. Pharma really coming in 2014, but the implications from an M&A perspective is pharma now has to compete a lot more aggressively with players that didn't exist as competitors for some of these larger deals 5-10 years ago. And their firepower is also a bit diminished as it compares to some of these players. So the competition is pretty tough and will continue again as market values continue to rise.
And Tim, what do you see?
Similar to what I would say is these what I would call emerging companies, especially companies who have sort of gained firepower in the last period of time. I think they're the ones who really are acting aggressively because they know they can move quicker, and they also know they have to move more quickly than the big guys. So again, we see a dynamic where those guys are ready to move much more quickly and sometimes earlier. Because again, they see that as their advantage, that they can move more quickly than pharma. So again, from I think the environment of small companies, again, it just creates a new dynamic with different sorts of potential acquirers, and having more than one type of acquirer, is always a healthy thing. I think that the larger guys, right, their focus is going to be on what I call the big acquisitions that the tens of billions or $100 billion acquisitions really to fundamentally change their businesses, or frankly, and I would say earlier stage technology acquisitions that are going to fundamentally change the way they can innovate. And I think the specialty guys sort of play in the space in between a little bit more than pharma.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that I want to just chime in on, I think it also ties in with one of the other drivers of all this M&A activity we're seeing in the sector, which again is focused on strategic portfolio management and rationalization. So, increasing firepower also involves divesting certain assets, taking that capital so you have more firepower. And the market really is rewarding companies that are really thinking like portfolio managers. I mean, if you cannot if you don't see a path to being number 1, 2, or 3 in a chosen segment, then you're seeing these companies make some decisions to sell those businesses, and the market is actually rewarding them for doing that.
How are the Affordable Care Act and other healthcare reforms impacting M&A in the pharma and biotech industry? Tim?
Mark, I think this is really a continuation of pressures over the last 10 to 20 years, and while we can focus on the Affordable Care Act, I think frankly a lot of these pressures have been there before the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of them coming from the private sector in the United States, the businesses that pick up the healthcare costs for their employees. So I think clearly there's continued momentum and understandable momentum to try to rein in the costs of medical care in the United States. I don't think any of us expect that to change. I think the question is, can we get it right? Can we control healthcare costs in areas where there's waste, while at the same time not cutting off the ability to innovate and bring new products to the market? And I think that remains to be seen. But it's clearly on everyone's radar. I think this is a number one issue at any large pharma company trying to get their products, particularly into the U.S. market. And frankly, it's the U.S. market catching up to other markets, whether it's European markets, Canadian markets, wherever, where these issues have always been present. Those have always been testing grounds for what the U.S. market's going through now.
Orly?
Yeah, I would also, I think the thing to keep in mind with ACA and healthcare reform is that pharma's key customers are being impacted significantly more directly, so the payers and providers. And so as those payers and providers are impacted this way, you're seeing a lot of consolidation, right? And with consolidation is buying power and influence, and so they're continuing to squeeze pharma's pricing and margins, and that's further fueling the need for growth and acquisitions. So I think that will continue. I mean, at the end of the day, payers and the government being the biggest one, cares about drugs that meet unmet needs that are clinically different. And will actually solve problems, right? So, and that's what they're going to reimburse. And so, those drugs that are clinically different are probably more specialized, are the ones that are going to become the more desirable targets for pharma from an M&A perspective.
Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, pharma is an integral part of the healthcare industry, right? And with the ACA, there's more emphasis on that. And if you look at the ACA, it's really about decreasing costs and increasing quality. And when you talk about costs, it's about pricing of therapeutics and pricing of drugs. And that's where the real pressure is coming on. It's how do we provide better care at lower cost? And so whether it's through pharma's interactions with PBMs and payers, or even trying to get direct access to their customers, the patients, that's where things are needing to be innovated on.
And I also think healthcare reform also will pave the way for biosimilars, right? So biosimilars have been quite prevalent outside of the U.S. and Europe and Asian markets and Latin America, but they're not so far away anymore. I mean, they're certainly on the horizon. You see companies such as Amgen and Actavis forming a joint venture around biosimilars, products that four products that they want to bring to the market. In 2017, Sandoz and Hospira, right behind them. So I think we're going to see that emergence start happening sooner.
Yeah, I mean, just I think of a couple of examples that exemplify this. I mean, one that I think are unprecedented. One is maybe a year or two ago now, the debate around Avastin and Lucentis, and the fact that the government actually ran the study in AMD to show how these two compared at their own cost, and then based on the results of that study, CMS supported the use of Avastin off-label for the treatment of AMD. You know, to me, it's incredible. No company could ever do that, by the way, right? So a company couldn't support the use of their product off-label, but our government said, based on price and what they thought was comparable data, that you know, it's okay to move patients, you know, to Avastin. So to me, unprecedented. I think the other thing we've been seeing, and again, I was actually with a pharma CEO last night, is just the power of PBMs in pricing negotiations. And you know, I think back when I was in pharma, you know, we were talking about 10% discounts. They're now 50% discounts, oftentimes with big upfronts, you know, to sort of, you know, get the hook in. So tremendous power in PBMs to provide cost savings, you know, for their customers, but also, you know, to generate, you know, profits for themselves. And you know, these are things that have just, you know, to me, just exemplify the continuing pressures. And you know, I see no reason to believe they'll stop.
And what you haven't seen in the space up until now is that pricing transparency, right? Especially with employers who are paying for a lot of their employees of insurance, right? So there's a lot of companies going after that pricing transparency, pricing stability, and that impacts on pharma's top line as well.
Great, thanks. So far in 2014, we've seen a lot of mega deals in the news. Forest Actavis, Shire AbbVie. We've also seen some notable attempts at deals over $5 billion, like Pfizer's bid for AstraZeneca, Valiant's bid for Allergan. Any thoughts as to why we've seen so many mega deals, Orlin?
Sure. Well, I think yeah, it depends on sort of how you define mega deal. You know, in this, you know, in the last few months, $5 billion doesn't seem like a mega deal anymore when you start hearing you know, numbers like 100 billion. But I think, you know, the 5 billion plus deals in life sciences is going to become the new norm. That has to do with, you know, rising market value, the multiples that some of these companies are going for, and the fact that the most desirable targets, you know, are north of $5 billion. And a lot of them happen to be sort of in the specialty space. I think it's also a reflection, again, of increased firepower across all of life sciences. You know, when you've got more ammo to work with, you're willing to place bigger bets. And then I also think it's, you know, there's a trend related to diversification. So you look at generics, you know, willing to, you know, looking for growth as well. Where they're entering into the you know, specialty branded space. I think we may see more of that. It'll be interesting to see how, you know, Actavis and Forest Labs come together with sort of their new innovative business model.
I mean, you know, Orlin said before, if you want to be 1, 2, maybe 3 in a specific sector, you certainly don't want to be 4, 5, and 6, right? And the way to be 1 and 2 is to own the whole space. And I think a lot of this activity is about doing that.
Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, I would go back to some of our early comments. Part of it also is it's a combination of psychology and need. So again, there's clearly a need. Again, people have realigned their businesses, but they still don't have all their answers. And again, in the market, you know, you get rewarded for bringing an entire solution to a problem, but it's rare that your internal sourcing of, it's rare to internally source an entire solution. So I think that's one thing that drives it. But I think also, again, psychologically, it's deemed a healthy environment. So we're out of the doldrums of the, you know, second half of the last decade and into the excitement of the first half of this decade. And I think that psychology, you know, plays a role. And there's also, if somebody's doing one, I better be doing one.
That's right.
Right. You know, there's that whole mentality as well. And I think, you know, I think we've seen all those factors playing into this.
Yeah, I do think that picking up on that point, Tim, you know, there have been certain segments within life sciences where there have been transformative deals that have catalyzed other deals. It's a bit of sort of the keeping up with the Joneses, but for the life sciences industry, animal health is one, right? So when Pfizer spun off its animal health business, you know, create Zoetis, the #1 player in the space. I mean, that had, you know, the other 6 to 7 animal health business owners thinking about, okay, what's our path to value here? Then, you know, you saw some swaps and some sales there. But I also think, you know, an interesting theme throughout a lot of these larger deals is also, you know, the tax inversion opportunity, right? So, you know, clearly there is a benefit there. We don't think that that is the driver of these deals, but there has been a very big spike in those deals, and clearly redomiciling your headquarters to outside of the U.S. to a more favorable tax jurisdiction is an added benefit and something that we're seeing a lot of, and I think we're going to see more of that.
Great, thanks. Another recent trend that we're seeing seems to be big pharma companies swapping assets, like Bayer and Merck, or the three-way Novartis GSK Lilly swap. Tim, what's going on that's encouraging companies to explore this strategy?
Well, again, I think it's about focus and being more focused than ever, and away from the sort of conglomerate approach of a decade and 2 decades ago. So I think that's really what's driving it, and people are trying to say, okay, what do I do best? Where can I compete? Where can I be number 1 or 2? And where can I only be number 5 or 6? And I can't afford to be number 5 or 6. So I think, again, I think to me that's the major driver. And again, it's just rationalization and focus of businesses around where can people compete.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the term swaps is an interesting term. I mean, it might be a misnomer. I mean, these tend to be specific transactions. Obviously, they're occurring in a paired or sort of matched way. But I think what it points to, certainly amongst large pharma, is a convergence around thinking, again, where do we want to play and where do we want to place our bets? And I think these large pharma companies, it's interesting, a lot of those swaps are happening amongst the large pharma companies, and I think there's a recognition there that that there are opportunities to unlock value through some of this creative deal making. And so I think the appetite amongst the large pharma companies around creative deal making, especially amongst themselves, is fairly high. So I think you're going to continue to see some interesting deal structures like swaps.
Right. And another deal structure that pharma companies can consider is the collaboration agreement. Why have these come about, and how are they changing the way companies can approach M&A? Tim?
Well, yeah, I think these are test drives. So these are ways for pharma to get involved in things where they may not have core competencies, and get involved in technologies where they may not have core competencies, but rather than acquiring them, biting them off, getting into a collaboration where they manage their financial risk, but also they learn from their collaborators around the technology. So again, I think it's both a way for them to learn how to innovate in a way that they otherwise might not be able to do, and in doing so also to just manage their economic risk in a structure that doesn't put them out too much.
Well,
yeah, I think you're going to see different variations of these sort of relationships, whether they're collaborations, alliances, contingent structures, again, where achievement of certain milestones, will be met with certain payouts. I mean, you're seeing a lot of that. I think GSK's sale of their oncology business and Novartis' sale of vaccines contained elements of substantial contingent consideration. Same with Furiex acquisition by Forest. There was certainly contingent payment aspects to that as well. I also think you're going to see interesting transactions. So, for example, we're finding in large pharma a lot of companies are continuing to rationalize their supply chain and the number of manufacturing plants that they have. For fear of sort of having some of those plants sit idle or become obsolete, and so we're seeing a lot of those companies sell those actually to contract manufacturing organizations that actually service them and will continue to service them, and that gives these large pharma companies really that flexibility around capacity to flex up when a product's taken off and in order to meet demand, or flex down when it's not. And so that risk, it's another sort of risk mitigating tactic that we're seeing a lot of large pharma companies do.
I mean, I think in terms of, Tim mentioned before about the changing business model, right? And pharma needs to work it out, and how they're working it out is with doing creative structures, right? Whether it's the swap or whether it's the collaboration, whether it's outright purchase, and this is kind of the poking and prodding to try and see what best fits their model, 10 and 20 years down the line.
I mean, I just following. I mean, deal structure. You don't see an unstructured deal anymore, whether it's an acquisition or a collaboration. So, that's part and parcel in the market right now. You very rarely see a just clean, full acquisition, except that, amongst the largest companies. Just to follow up the other of these asset swaps, I think the one that impressed me was the Glaxo one and the divestment of their oncology business at a time when oncology has been one of the big drivers in this whole evolution to specialty products. That certainly caught my eye, and it's either sort of a healthy admission that Glaxo is not going to be number 1 or 2 in that space. So like Glaxo would be number 1 or 2 where they choose to be. So, or I do wonder if it's a bit of a reflection of saturation of the oncology marketplace, where someone's taking an objective look at this and looking at the level of competition, but also the increasing pricing pressure and the scrutiny pricings coming in and deciding, look, that's not sustainable. I'm going to try to go find some place to play. It's probably a combination of both, but to me, it's the first time I've seen a large guy walk away from a space everyone else is trying to get into because of the incentives and the specialty focus and the profitability of that sector.
Yeah, I agree on that. I think it's a combination of both. And what's really interesting on the early side with GSK is they're really active on early stage biotech as well as new funds to try and find new areas. So oncology's hot now. It's really big now. What's the next play? And that's what they're looking at.
Well, to follow on to that question, there's that activity in immuno-oncology, activity in Hep C. What other areas do you guys see a lot of activity coming up? And Adam, I'll ask you to comment first.
Yeah, I mean, from the early stage again, I'm seeing things in rare diseases, gene therapy. Those that have stuck with it in gene therapy are starting to reap the rewards now, and there's certainly new technologies that are bubbling up and getting a lot of funding in that regard. In the GI tract, there's an emerging field of the microbiome that our firm is particularly interested in. So there's all these new technologies that are coming up. Our job is to not work out where pharma is interested now, but where they will be in 3 and 5 years' time. And so there's some of the technologies that are coming through.
Orlin, what areas do you see a lot of activity coming up?
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing about all these areas is that they really do fall under sort of specialty, pharma, right? That's where a lot of this activity is. So I mean, I would foresee continued focus in immunotherapies, in virology, oncology, respiratory. I could even see some more activity in diabetes. From a generics perspective, we saw some activity on the injectable side. I would foresee that to continue. And then I also think that the topical space in the generic space is ripe for some activity. It's a highly fragmented market. There's about 4 major players, but the rest is fairly fragmented.
And Tim, what about you?
Yeah, so maybe just a couple of additional observations. I think again, I think with hepatitis C and immuno-oncology, what you're trying to see is people trying to be number 1 or 2 in delivering a solution to patients, and it's much like what happened to HIV. There were a handful of companies who became the dominant players, and they didn't just have one asset; they had the combination of assets that really brought the solution to patients. And so that happened in HIV, just going through it, or just at the tail end of it in hepatitis C. Great thing for those patients, by the way. Let's not forget that. I mean, just miraculous things for these patients. We're seeing it at immuno-oncology now. It's the tip of the iceberg. I don't think everyone even knows all the assets they need, but people are certainly trying to grab them, because, from the early products we've seen that they can have very profound effects, but it's complicated, and figuring out which products have to be combined with which products to provide cures is not straightforward. So people are trying to really have a basket of those within a company that they can do that with. I mean, one area, again, we think about that'll follow the viral theme is hepatitis B, where again, this is currently a disease of hundreds of millions of people who have to stay on drug for life and still have risks of liver failure, cirrhosis, and these sorts of things. And it needs combination therapy to cure it. And there are new mechanisms companies are working on to combine with current mechanisms that we think are going to provide cures and discrete treatment regimens of 6 months instead of 60 years. So again, that fits very much into the HIV hepatitis C paradigm of combinations. And again, what we're seeing in the antiviral companies is they want access to all the potential agents that are going to become that combination therapy that creates that solution for the patient. again, similar to Adam, I'm getting old. I never thought I'd see the renaissance of gene therapy, RNAi, cell therapy.
Epigenetics, yep.
Epigenetics, but these things, and I've played in all of them in my life so far, and they're all back with a vengeance. I see a new T-cell company come in my doors every day. And some of the funding that's gone on for the T-cell companies is astounding. So these are the breakthrough innovation areas. Some of them are new, some of them are 20 years old, but there have been key innovations that are enabling them now. So again, that's a feeder for pharma innovation, and pharma needs that. And we're seeing pharma taking interest in things that frankly I thought I'd never see.
And they are very interested. They're not just sitting on the sidelines and waiting. They all, or the majority of them, have corporate venture arms as well that are putting their dollars and capital at risk and hoping to share in the upside. But that gives them a little bit more of an insight into what's going on, a bit of a finger on the pulse, and being really active in all these emerging areas.
So going deeper into innovation, companies like Merck are setting up research hubs both in the US and abroad. How do these institutions help big pharma, and what does this suggest about the importance of R&D? Tim, I'll ask you to comment first, please.
Yeah, well, so again, I think this is a reflection within pharma, and a healthy reflection that to do what they need to do, they need help. That it's not going to come from within their walls. So this again has been ongoing for decades now. It's not new, but it's continuing, and it continues to gain momentum, and it really now takes on a geographic and physical representation of people trying to co-locate their employees in hubs of innovation, whether it's Cambridge, South San Francisco, wherever. I think it's healthy. Whether or not it's a cure for their ills, I don't know. I think it's overall good for the environment. I think what it's best for, frankly, are the academic centers in these innovation hubs, who really can take an advantage of having this early interest of people being side by side with them. So again, my observation of the increased interest in academic centers to translate their basic discoveries into products is to me is what's unprecedented. And again, having that early interaction with pharma companies, biotech companies, helping them figure out how do you actually do that, how do you take your idea into a product, I think is a very powerful thing on the academic side of the equation.
Adam, how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's about keeping the finger on the pulse, right? And if you look at pharma, every pharma has an R&D company, an R&D sector, right? But the reality is that they're better at the development than the research, and the NIH budget is the billions of dollars budget to do that research, and that's where all the innovation's happening. So whether it's Pfizer's Center of Therapeutic Innovation in New York, or J&J and Janssen in San Diego and Boston, Merck, as you mentioned, it's their way of getting access to the latest innovation that's coming through next. I think it's them being active, and it's them being really interested of what's going to fill their pipelines.
Yeah, I also think in addition to sort of proximity, so being close to where the action is, access to scientific talent, being in the middle of where things are going on, where partnerships can be formed. I think it's also about cost. I think some of the larger pharma companies have looked at their R&D costs and think okay, we can run this a little more efficiently. We know that innovation comes from our R&D, but consolidating into some of these fewer hubs, I think there's a cost component to that as well.
I mean, the other thing is, if you flip it on the other side, the academic medical centers are realizing that the pharma are doing that, right? And they want to share in the upside themselves. So they're getting pretty professionalized in how they're interacting with pharma and wanting to share in that upside. So there's a lot happening in that space as well.
I mean, one potential disconnect I see, falling onto this academic side that I mentioned and Matt mentioned earlier, there's been an explosion of intellectual property from academic centers, probably 10 to 100-fold increase from 10 years ago. And that's driven by this interest, both from academics but from pharma reaching in. The problem is there's not a match of increase in funding, right? If anything, there's a decrease in funding. There's less government funding, there's less R&D budget in pharma, and there's less venture funding. So again, we've created this cycle, and I think we all see it, where we have lots of eager entrepreneurs in academia with inventions and patents and tech transfer offices, but there's a real mismatch with capital to support those and to try to translate those. And I think that's creating a bit of frustration. I think in the academic institutions, can get burdened with their intellectual property budgets,
Right.
because those get very expensive to keep up if somebody else isn't picking up those costs for you.
Yeah, and good for Tim and I who are in the venture world, right, and trying to pick off the best assets. But certainly we want the innovation and cures and treatments coming through and being commercialized. So there is that need for that next step in capital.
Great, thanks. With a rising middle class in Africa, South America, and Asia, how are pharma companies utilizing M&A to take advantage of this growing class? Orland?
Sure. I think maybe there's a perception that emerging markets has been sort of neglected over the last few years, obviously with the financial crisis, but they haven't been abandoned, and I think we're going to see an uptick in activity from an M&A perspective in these markets. I think emerging markets will probably represent about 25% of all sales in 2015, and I think that's only going to get higher. But I think companies that are going to approach emerging markets are going to do it much more cautiously this time around. And so whether that is partnering through joint ventures or alliances with local companies that know the regulatory process there, we'll probably see more of that. I think from a compliance perspective, that is, I think, on the radar of every major CEO and certainly chairman of a board in light of some of the issues and challenges we've seen in China. So I think as a part of an acquisition, strong diligence from a compliance perspective is going to be key. But even more important, what are the controls? Compliance controls that these companies are going to put in place to keep them out of trouble, right, from an FCPA perspective. So I think double-digit growth. I mean, you tend to find these in emerging markets. So I think the large pharma companies realize and know that that's going to be an important part of their future.
I would just add that I think this is solely the domain of large pharma, right? There's no way the next tier and the next tier have the ability to do this. And that's because these are really long-term, sustained commitments. You don't just walk into these countries and build a business, any of them. These, just to, get your bearings, these are 10 and 20-year commitments of have your business in there, having, the mixture of your internationals and your locals, understanding the customs and how business works. But it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
It's clearly happening, in China and some of the South American countries. To me, the interesting one is Africa, and it's one I hadn't thought about before. But early one morning, listening to some news show, they're talking about population growth in Africa and changing economics and evolving of a middle class there over the next years. And something I really hadn't thought about. But I'll be interested to see if that's reflected in behaviors of companies. But it's complicated, right? So we talk about trying to focus and do what you do well. Running a business in a new market is riskier than investing in new technology any day.
And it's about when, right? That 10 to 20 year commitment is a long commitment. And CEO of a pharma that puts his foot down or his or her foot down and says, I'm going to make this commitment. That's a large bet and a pretty risky bet. So I totally agree with Tim.
Thanks. What types of companies are approaching VC firms right now seeking funding? Is there one area that's attracting more interest from VC investors than others? Adam?
So on the life science side, some of the areas that I mentioned before, the microbiome in the gut, epigenetics, RNAi again, you have cell therapy and regenerative medicine, something that's near and dear to my heart. So there is a real interest in innovative technologies in the life sciences. And I agree with what Tim said before, which platform discovery plays, there's a renaissance happening in that space. And so it's almost going back to the way it was in terms of discovery. Outside of that, there's an absolute explosion going on in healthcare IT and digital health. The amount of money and capital being poured into that space is quite astounding, and the pace at which it's doing so. So, I think a report came out the other day that said the funding into digital health and healthcare IT companies for 2014 has already equaled that of 2013 in its entirety. So that's certainly attracting a lot of interest for early stage investors.
Tim, what do you see?
Yeah, just follow on. So again, I'm just overwhelmed by entrepreneurs and their enthusiasm in small companies. So it's a great thing. So we see all sorts of things, but I would say if your question is not what's coming in, but what are we interested in, what gets funded, I think it reflects what Adam said. And I'll start with what's not getting funded, like a general category of product, a GP product, very difficult, right? Because there are no GP companies left, or very few. And they're all generic markets, and the regulatory pathways are bare. So we see those, but we don't go too close to them. What we are interested in, we think of two themes. I'll stick with biopharma, and then maybe comment on healthcare high-tech platforms, much like Adam mentioned. So we really see a resurgence in this interest in platforms, and this is the need to innovate. This is the need to be the best and have the best, most innovative products to be able to support pricing. So definitely see that as an area coming in and an area getting funded. And the more they get funded, the more they'll come in. Mm-hmm. So it feeds on itself. And then the other thing we look at are more the asset-centric plays. And again, there we again tend to look at what in the more near term our customers are looking for. So here, we can, I think, predict a little bit better because these products are, 5 years away from approval, that they'll fit into someone's portfolio or not. And again, these tend to be things like oncology agents, immuno-oncology agents, inflammation, rare diseases, being the types of things that, I think are getting supported. Healthcare, tech, I think, again, an explosion of opportunities. Still not sure what it all means to me. We're a tech and a healthcare firm, so this part looks a little bit more like the tech side of the world, where the sort of barriers to start a business are very low, so you see a lot of them. Very interesting things going on from the level of the consumer to the level of the enterprise, and great need, for all of them. Where the business models are going to play out, I think it'll be interesting. So I think it's still early in the whole evolution of healthcare tech, but certainly a hot area, and one will be interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it's a very different risk appetite or risk factor whether you're thinking about healthcare IT versus building an early stage biotech company. There's that binary type outcome here with regulatory approval and working through pharma and business development and those angles. With this side, with the health IT side, it's about revenue generating, which pharma doesn't, biotech doesn't really have until commercialization. So it's about a different risk appetite from the early stage investor side in terms of where they're going to play and put their money.
I mean, it just finish up. We've seen a couple interesting types of opportunities that sort of connect biotech, biopharmaceuticals with healthcare tech. So one is again sort of using technology to help deliver a therapy. Mm-hmm. There are lots of these patient reminders and those sorts of things, but we've seen programmable things where there are diurnal variations around a need to deliver a drug that are somewhat individualized to a patient, but allowing the patient to wear a device that delivers that drug according to the patient's individual diurnal needs. Mm-hmm. And very interesting stuff, and very reduced technology to do very complicated things. I think the other thing, again, we've seen, getting back to challenges to the biopharmaceutical businesses, are really understanding what are the drivers of behavior in terms of consumers and their prescriptions and utilization of their products, and getting back to things like PBM, discounting, and patient couponing. So there hasn't been a whole lot of granular data by which an executive can look and try to see the effectiveness of, for instance, offering a larger discount versus a larger coupon in terms of how that drives sales. But now there are data aggregators available who are, have systems in place that can collect that data, so a pharmaceutical executive can actually look at a patient level, at a geographic level, at a state level, and try to, at an economic level, and try to understand, okay, where can I make a difference in what I'm offering to the consumer? Where is a discount the best way to go versus where is couponing the best way to go? Where is couponing not effective, and where am I wasting my money? So we're seeing, again, uses of technology and classic technology by companies, again, to better understand how they apply their incentives to try to resonate with consumer behaviors and consumer interests.
Yeah, and I think on that point, I mean, the larger pharma companies, I mean, when you think about value leakage, right, adherence, comes to mind, right? Is a patient, first of all, picking up a prescription and then actually taking it, and then are they, refilling it? So adherence is something that, I think digital health and technology is going to play a very big role in. So whether it's ingestible, chips on pills that communicate with a PDA, your iPhone, which communicates to your caregiver, to your doctor, that monitors when you are taking that medicine, and how does that line up with sort of your how your body functions. I think you're going to see a lot of play there. I mean, there's a company Proteus that in fact does that. Interesting technology, so I think we're going to see more companies like that. I also think the gamification trend is something that's going to make doing this a lot more interesting. At the end of the day, you got to engage the patient as much as you can, and I think gamification is something. Technologies, I think, is something we'll see more of.
I mean, and the answer to all of this is data, right? It's not drug development. It's about getting your hands on the data and being able to use it in the right way. Right up until now, pharma hasn't had access to that data, or they haven't really utilized it, but they certainly haven't had the data around their end customer, and that's what they're after at the moment.
Great, thanks. Given the boom in the healthcare industry, what are investors like you looking to do in regards to managing exits? Are you looking to sell or raise more money because investors are eager to enter healthcare? Tim?
Well, I think the good news is we currently have more options than we had 5 years ago. So the first thing I would say, and we talk about this all the time with our companies, you can't build yourself to be acquired. It just doesn't have to. It doesn't happen that way. You really have to build yourself to deliver value and to try to be sustainable. And when I talk about sustainable, I'm not talking about 100 years, but you have to believe you can build a business out over 10 years, and that's what you have to be working to do. That the ability to actually not just talk about that but do it, is dependent on the access to capital and having the public markets open to early stage companies has really changed that dynamic. So what I just described is possible now. So companies don't have to get stuck after Series A, Series B, or Series C. They have a way to work through that by accessing the public markets, and that makes a huge difference in terms of how companies think about plotting their course and their future. Now again, what we don't know is how long that will be there. I think it's been there longer than we all thought it would be, but it's made a great difference. And again, I think a lot of companies have really taken advantage of it over the last 2 years and have developed balance sheets that they probably couldn't have conceived they would have had 4 or 5 years ago. And that gives them a chance really to fulfill their mission and really create value.
Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, so from an early stage company aspect, biotech, pharma fit into the broader healthcare, and healthcare is changing, via regulation and delivery of care. And so in terms of exits, I see more and more players coming in. So it's not just pharma on pharma, but there's interest from information companies, there's interest from tech companies, payers, providers. They're all interested in grabbing a piece of this new healthcare industry that's changing. So I see that as a very positive thing for companies that are coming up through the ranks.
And a lot of intermingling, right? Generic companies becoming branded companies becoming biosimilar companies.
Right.
And again, then I think other service providers getting more interfaced with other linears and building out again to try to provide solutions. Again, creating a universe of buyers we wouldn't have thought about 5 and 10 years ago.
I mean, sit here 3 years ago and tell me that Google's going to start a biotech company in the longevity space. I would have walked out, right? But they're very, they have said that healthcare is a difficult ask, but they're putting serious time and capital and bringing in some really talented folks to lead that path. So it's interesting what's happening.
Great. We've spoken a lot about the drivers for the pharma and biotech industries, but what factors pose the biggest threats? Orland?
Well, I think some of these factors are going to be constant, aren't going to go away. So, pricing and reimbursement pressures will only get worse. Regulatory pressures, especially outside of the U.S. learning about the unknowns of the rollout of healthcare reform over the coming years will be something that the industry will need to manage and pay a lot of attention to. I don't think generics aren't going anywhere, especially with these increased pressure on pricing. You're going to see biosimilars come into the market. What impact they're going to have, remains to be seen. But I think the broader brand of large pharma and the role and the value proposition that it will play in healthcare, and its customers and the other stakeholders understanding that value proposition is something that large pharma is continuing to try and convey and coalesce around.
Adam?
I mean, I try and think of where the healthcare industry will be in 10 years' time, and there's a large contingent of folks that I speak to that actually think that the payers are in trouble, right? And if the payers go away, then what does that mean for pharma, right? And this concept of consumerization of healthcare, pharma has never really had that access to their end customer, to their patients. Imagine a world where that happens, right? And that's a total different business model for pharma, where they need to now act like a product. Consumer product company that's delivering drugs in the right way, in a satisfactory way to not only patients but consumers. So that changing business model of what happens in the next 10 to 15 years is something I'm keeping an eye on.
Tim, what threats or concerns?
Yeah, I mean, some of this I guess gets a little personal. I mean, I certainly understand the pressures and where they're coming from. What I worry more about are the solutions and what I would call blunt solutions. That frankly, to me, create more of an environment of rationing rather than rational use of resources. It's somewhat a less rational approach. I take a step back and I look at how the world's evolved over the last 100 years. We've doubled life expectancy since 1900. So it didn't change from BC to early 1900, and it's doubled in 100 years. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but clearly one of them are drugs. And you can see that in where we impacted mortality. So first it was with infectious disease, right? With vaccines and antibiotics and now antivirals. Infectious disease used to kill everyone in the 30s and 40s, and that's why we live longer now. The next big focus of biopharma was cardiovascular disease, which cardiovascular morbidity and mortality now decreasing. For lots of reasons, but clearly because of drugs and the effects those have on some of the underlying factors of cardiovascular disease. And now we're seeing it with cancer, with some cancers being cured, other cancers people living with for 10 years that I can tell you 5 years ago I never thought would have been possible. So tremendous progress and increasing quality of life and longevity. And I think we just need to be careful about how we taper that and tinker with it. I think to me, what I've learned is incentives and disincentives drive our behaviors, and I'm not sure everyone's always aware that that's really true. I mean, the move into oncology was because you could price drugs in a way where you could make profit and return profit to your shareholders. Once we start taking that away, that money will move, and have no doubt about it. Cardiovascular disease, the reason people went in there because it was a huge market where you could price products to make money. The bane of industry's existence or current existence is its success, right? All the drugs that change cardiovascular disease are all generic. There's no way to bring a new product to that market and get it priced in a way that most people are willing to take that risk. So those incentives really make a difference, and I think we have to be cognizant of the benefits of innovation, because we see them and they're real. They may not happen in 2 years, but they certainly happened in 100 years. We just have to be careful about using blunt instruments to control costs, because I do think blunt instruments really just are rationing, and I'm not sure. I hope we can find a better way to get at it.
Great, thanks. Orlin, can you share your perspective on large pharma's capacity for conducting M&A relative to biotechs, specialty pharma, and generics, and how this can play a role in the remainder of 2014?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned, the concept of firepower, it's shifting. It is shifting. Specialty care companies have a lot more firepower. I'd say the firepower for biotechs and generics are slightly down, and while overall I think pharma's firepower has dipped relative to these other segments, it's not going anywhere. And again, with rising market values, record low financing environments, low interest rates, that's gonna continue.
Great, thanks. I think a question might be coming in from the audience. Looks like, I believe one is. Yes, we do have a few moments for audience questions. So a request out there is, can you guys talk more about the importance of healthcare IT and how pharma and biotech companies are using information technology to help drive revenues? I'll throw it to whoever cares to comment first.
Yeah, I mean, well, so healthcare IT specifically with pharma, so less driving revenues, but decreasing costs and improving outcomes is major focus has gone into improving efficiencies and optimization of clinical trials, finding the right patient for the clinical trial that can then, move the drug out into the market. We've spoken a lot about pharma's ability to track those patients once the drug is in the market. That is a pure healthcare IT data, big data approach that pharma is investing in. One of the pharma companies, Merck, actually has $200 to $300 million each year spent on health IT and big data, digital health solutions and companies out there. So very much away from their core business of drug development. They invest in those companies, they share in the revenue of those companies, they look to acquire those companies when they want, and it actually changes their business model as well.
I also think clearly the consumer is being empowered by digital health, by mobile health, in a way that they've never been empowered before. That power is shifting from doctors and physicians to patients as well. And so you got a much more educated consumer who has a lot more control around achieving some of these outcomes. I think that's an important trend to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, so I think, again, pharmaceutical companies are looking to engage with patients in ways that they never have before. And, these can, take the form of, from traditional internet sites and blogs and things like that to, interacting with patients they know are taking their drugs and, providing them guidance, feedback about adverse events or how to take this with food and those sorts of things in a real-time fashion. But again, that link, right, between the patient and their device to give them advice gives them information about those patients and their behaviors and what the patients are interested in, what they're not interested in. So I think there's a lot of an attempt to do that, and I think again that this whole change from these mass market products to these specialty products feed into that. So in their purest form, for rare genetic diseases, these companies know by name every one of those patients getting their products. So, again, my experience before it was in vogue was with prolastin for alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, a Bayer product, where literally it was direct to product supply. And that gives you insights. And all these rare diseases can fit in that model and really give an intimacy between the company and the patient, really to understand their needs. And I think that's what people are going to try to work on as their model, really to understand what drives patient taking the medication, what are their problems with it, what are the compliance issues with it. So I think there's really going to try to be an intimacy. It raises all sorts of questions about privacy and should a pharma company be doing that? And there are a whole host of regulatory issues around that. But I think that's the world we're in. And I think, despite privacy concerns, these things will happen because I think patients want them.
Yeah, think about the psychology of that goes into purchasing any other product that's out there away from drugs, right? And it just doesn't happen in the pharma industry, right? So there's an enormous amount of branding and marketing and directed branding and marketing that's customized to the patient. That needs to start happening now.
And I also think, there's a generational component to this too, right? And the adoption levels of these newer technologies. So it's only going to increase as you got younger folks, who are aging and are comfortable with these technologies and using those to be connected, not only to their caregivers and to their doctors, but other patients, right? They're connecting in ways that they've never been able to connect before.
Great. One more question's coming from the audience. With significant cutbacks in R&D over the past 20 years, how does VC and early stage investments help mold the industry, and how has that changed over the years? Adam, I wonder if you care to comment.
Well, we spoke a little bit about some of the key areas that I think are bubbling up, whether it's epigenetics, rare diseases, the platform plays that Tim spoke about. What is interesting is the venture model is changing itself, and the venture model, I think, is that early platform or that early engine to big pharma. So whether it's larger amounts of early stage funding from one or two firms that actually gets companies to a value inflection point, whether it's a change in corporate structure. You know, there's been moves from a C Corp to an LLC, which means that you can essentially have one vertical or one program in a subsidiary, and then spin that off and then continue with the rest of the umbrella company. There's a lot going on in terms of repurposing shelved assets that are on, you know, a farmer's within a farmer's keep, where you know, a significant amount of money has gone into those assets, just sitting there because it's not part of their core focus or something went wrong on execution. Those in my field are getting very interested in those assets and think that it's with technology and with their know-how and ability to move quickly, can you know, generate significant value in a short period of time.
Tim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for what is the most entrepreneurial country, you know, in the United States. So again, I think, you know, it just fits well into the notion that, you know, real innovative R&D is best done by entrepreneurial people in small companies, and that has been the case. It'll continue to be the case, but I think it's a real recognition of it. There's a recognition by pharma. But I also think there's a whole new world of entrepreneurs who, you know, aren't growing up like we did, thinking you need to go work for a company for 30 years. You know, none of us did that. But you know, those days are gone, and people, you know, young folks with scientific interests are really hungry to go out and to try to do their own thing and really invent and you know, bring their own product to the market. So, you know, I think it's incredibly healthy and you know, great opportunity both for pharma, but also for, you know, the early stage entrepreneurs and the VCs who help them build companies.
Great, thanks. Well, I think we're right at the top of the hour. We're actually in a little extra time in World Cup mode. I want to thank the panel for joining us today. I've been speaking with Adam Goldburn of Lux Capital, Orland Boston of EY, and Tim Shannon of Canaan Partners. Thanks very much for watching.